Hey, good morning. Good evening. I'm sorry. We did the morning this morning. We are going to be getting into our session dealing with I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. We're going to pick back up doing our deep dive. We had spent a little bit more time on looking at three arguments. The purpose of our, what's the matter?
The sound was on.
Is it on now?
Mhm.
Okay. Okay, sorry, they just told me the sound was off. We're going to dive back into the teleological argument, spend a little more time on that, looking at the argument for design relative to the fingerprint of God. And the question we've been asking is what is more reasonable? What faith is involved? And I'm getting this question um, weekly now, or comment, should I say, maybe not even a question. It could be a question, since they're asking the question. But when you say, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, it's impossible to need faith in order to be an atheist. No, it's not. And I'm probably going to preface it just because of that question coming up so often now. Faith is simply, the definition of faith is a belief system. And what we're driving at, what we're looking at is this. Everyone has a worldview, everyone has a belief system. And there are elements of your belief system in evolution, and as well as a creationist, that involve faith. You don't have the taste, the touch, the see, the smell test going on in order to. You have to use assumptions or belief system or whatever it may be in order for you to accept your particular ideology about that thing. And guess what? It's in evolution as well as creationism. We will, as a creationist, I will be upright and forthcoming and say, yeah, I believe in God and God created. And can I explain God? No, not so much. Can I see evidence for God? I believe so. But the same thing is true with an evolutionist. In fact, some people don't like it when I say it this way, but I'm pretty convinced that evolution is just as much a religion as creationism is, because of the faith and the worldview, belief system, ideology, presuppositions, everything that's involved in all of that, that need to be put into. And we're going to, as we go along, we're going to see where some of these scientists basically say that. It's a philosophical commitment to them. It's not scientific. They believe what they believe because of their philosophy. Because of their commitment to that philosophy, not so much because of the science. That's faith. And that's what we're getting into. So there is a set of belief systems that go along with what I believe and with what a person that would deem themselves an atheist believes, or even an agnostic per se. So anyway, we're going to go a little bit deeper into looking at the argument for design and pick up where we left off last week. And I think we may go one more week on some of this as we get into some of the particulars. I'm not so much sure, but we're going to be looking at the argument for design. Then we're going to look at the argument for morality, and where does morality come from. So let's get into this tonight and take a look at this. And we are going to be doing a little bit of background again, or a little bit of backstory on last week. And I think I mentioned what that is or what that represents last week. I believe so. If I didn't, we'll do it again here real quick. Homology is the understanding of similarities in structures, and it's the quote evidence, the idea used in the evolutionary teaching that since there is similarity in these structures, then we have a common ancestor. So since you have a dog's leg, a bat's wing, a seal's flipper, a human's arm, um, these types of structures, since they're so similar, is showing that we evolved from a common ancestor as such, and we're all connected in that manner. Well, the question we've been asking is, why does it need to be a common ancestor? Maybe it's just a common design. So maybe the design in itself is there. Maybe the design in itself comes from the designer per se. So a deer, a dog, horse have similar structures. The wing of a bat and the flipper in a penguin have similar structures. Is it the information that's built in? Maybe it's the information that's built into the DNA at the beginning of the design that has caused this to be what it is, if you want to say it that way. So that's where we, I think, left off last week per se. And, oh, I need to move it this way. We're going to look at genetic code a little bit as we get into this and what causes these proteins and molecules and DNA and proteins on the molecular level, what it does to define traits and define the characteristics that everyone has and everyone gets when we at conception. But what's the source of the genetic code? This is the question we're asking. Is it common ancestry? Is it common design from a creator, or just life chance and happenstance, or millions of years and all of that? So this is the question that we're looking at. This is the question we're bringing up here in this particular series. Bill Gates said that DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created. Now, we do know this. There's the old adage that what goes in comes out. And in computer IT software business and looking at the building of computers and whatnot, the information that's put into these systems come from an outside source. So there's language, there's computer language, there's computer information, there's there's been knowledge that's been placed into these computers to do what they do, but it still comes from an outside source. It's been programmed, and that's kind of what we're looking at. That's kind of what we're dealing with as we get along and go along with this. Now, I want us I want to point out that scientists know two things about information. They know, number one, that there's a carrier, and a carrier of that information. So if there's gonna be information given, it needs to be carried. But there also is pre-existing information in order to send the information. That would be the source, if you want to say it that way. So the meaning of the message lies with the carrier from the creator of that information. And it comes from pre-existing information. The question or the comment I could make on this is, it's not the stuff that we're made out of that makes us special, but it's the way we're put together. And this is the question we're asking. In the manner that we're put together, with the intricacy, with the complexity, with the language, with the information that's on the cellular level that's involved, we're put together that way. What did it? How did it get there? How did the information get there? And again, we know that if information is presented, then information has to be input. Where did that input of information come from? If you look at the screen right now, you're going to see science is built on philosophy, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. Before, during, and after related to science. Now, think about it. Philosophy determines the rules of science, and it's used during the actual science, and then philosophy determines the interpretation of the data. What we have been saying the whole time is this. Since science doesn't say anything, but scientists do, we have to look at that interpretation of the data. This is where you get into the argument, evolution or intelligent design. This is where you get into the argument of just chance and time in millions and billions of years, or is in the beginning intelligence, in the beginning God, if you want to say it that way. This is where the argument comes into play. This is where you're looking at the interpretation of the data. The same data is there. The same information is there. The question is, what is reasonable? What information can we use and look at to show the most reasonable way to interpret that data? And that's kind of the question we're going to be asking, and we have been asking in this session. So, does evolution occur? Now, understand that when we say evolution, you have to understand the definition of evolution as we get into this. There's microevolution, we'll talk about it in a minute, macroevolution. Microevolution is small adaptable changes. Macroevolution means to jump from one species to another species. That's never been found in the fossil record, just to let you know. Anyone that tells you that is not being truthful with you. They're not being upfront about it. There is no evidence. There is some interpretation of evidence, but we've never seen the clear evidence of where one species has jumped to another species. And you would think, and if you're going with millions and billions of years, that there would be stages where we see that kind of jump. The jump is just not there. It's not in the fossil record. And you're going to see as we go along with this, for example, Stephen Gould, one of the scientists that I'm going to quote here in these sessions, he says, no, it's not in the fossil record, folks. You know, as evolutionists, we can step back and try to, play word games or do whatever we want to do with this stuff. But to be honest, we have to be honest, it's not there. So what we're looking at when we say evolution is, what do we mean? Is it microevolution, which does exist? There is microevolution. That means small adaptable changes. We see that in nature. It's there, and it seems to be built in. The question is, who built it in? We do not see from one kind to another kind. We don't see from one species to another species. So do we get the reptile to the mammal? Do we get the this to that? Do we see that happening so much? No, not really. And this is where we ask the question again, what seems to be most reasonable? Darwinist Tim Barra, at some time ago, offered a progression of evolution, published it, and it became known as, I think I got it here, known as Barra's blunder, because it's actually an illustration of intelligent design. And what he used, and you'll hear people do this often, what he used is cars to show that the structural differences and the changes over time, you have one type of car to a different type of car or a different form of car. And what we see is adaptation. What we see is changes. You got 4 tires, you got metal, you got glass, you've got all of these forms of adaptation from the creator, from the designer who did this thing. But it's still what? It's still a car. It's the same thing true with dogs. We just saw a picture of a dog. Well, we've never seen anything go from something else to a dog or from a dog to something else. Chihuahuas, Great Danes, you've got the Malamutes, whatever they're called, you've got Shepherds, you've got Pekingese, you've got all kinds, but guess what? They're still dogs. It's called kind. They're still dogs. They will stay in that classification, have you determine that of what kind it is, and it's kind of a misnomer when we say kinds or whatnot, but they're still dog. It's still dog nests. Big dogs, little dogs, fat dogs, skinny dogs, but they're still dog. And the same thing is true with other species that we know of. Now, if you'll look at this particular illustration, the similarity of structure prove that the pot evolved from the teaspoon. No, it does not. You don't look at the change. What you see is the design. You go from a spoon to a large 6-quart pot. You see design in that, but it doesn't mean there's an evolution, and it's not a great illustration for evolution or whatnot. Same thing is true when we see these kinds of things that look like this in nature. Just because similarities are there and it looks like something, we know that a 6-quart pot is not a spoon. They're similar, but they're not the same thing. And the same thing is true in nature. Similarities don't necessarily mean that you have a common ancestor. The question is, what about the designer? Where did the design come from? Okay? Darwinists say that we all know of the Earth's creatures share a common ancestor by way of unguided macroevolutionary processes because of DNA and homology. DNA and proteins and homology, they say, we've got these particular, the DNA and proteins create the homology that creates the traits and the functions and the structure and whatnot. Since we have that, we know that evolution is true. How do we know that? Because it all points to here we go, that common ancestor rather than a common designer. Why? Because macroevolution is true. We know that evolution is true, and these structural traits change, and over time these changes bump over and jump into and create and have created in the past, from one species to the next and whatnot. But this is the problem you have with that, folks. When we get into this, we're getting into circular reasoning. Again, science doesn't say anything, but scientists do. And this is where you see some of the statements that are made. By the way, you can go online and you can look up former scientists that were atheists, and you can find former Christians that are now atheists for whatever reason, and just to be, straight up with that. But the science of circular reasoning goes along these lines, if I can say it this way. You have DNA and homology, which means there must be a common ancestor. But why not a common designer? Well, because evolution is true. What just happened here? This is where your commitment to your philosophical worldview comes into play, right here. Since I believe this is where your faith is exhibited. This is where your belief system comes into play. I believe evolution is true because I know evolution to be true because DNA and homology. How do you know it's true? Well, the DNA and homology say it's true. Ancestor, common sense, right? No, maybe common designer. Why do you believe that? Evolution is true. How do you know evolution is true? Because DNA and homology say so. See what we do here? This is where faith comes into play. This is where we have to look at all the evidence, and in looking at the evidence, ask the question, what's reasonable? What's logical to believe about the evidence that's being portrayed and the interpretation of that data, okay? Small adaptations lead to new species. That's micro. That's what I was talking about earlier. What arguments for evolution teach. They do micro to macro evolution. And then similarities and structures, the homology and the DNA are evidence of that common ancestor. This is what brings us to this. If you remember a few minutes ago, I made the comment or made the statement, it's not the stuff that makes us special, it's the way we're put together that makes us special, the designer, intelligence behind it, the ability to do it. Metal and glass are in an airplane. Question is, who made the airplane? Did the airplane need a designer? Not only who made the airplane, what makes it fly? Do you need language and information and software and ability to create in that thing the ability to fly? Absolutely, you do, okay? So just because you have metal and glass doesn't mean you have an airplane. It has to be designed. Same thing with ink and paper. I've got a notepad here with ink and paper. There are words on it. There are lines on it. There are paragraphs on it. And in that, guess what? There's information. So the information was put there by an outside force. It's not just because there's ink and paper that you have the information related to the ink and paper. Ink and paper do not make a book. They're part of the process and the design of the book, but just ink and paper by itself. And let me give an example. This is an old one. It was used years ago, and it's actually still relevant today. You don't expect a tornado to roll through. Okay, remember evolution teaches time, chance, millions and billions of years. So you have to have those things. You have to assume that because of the millions and billions of years and time and chance and processes, that we are what we are today. We have the creation that we have today. You are what you are today because of that. Chemical processes and all of that. By the way, Tuesday night, 7 o'clock, we're going to get into some of the questions we've been asked. We said we might take an evening to do that. We are, because of the questions that have been asked and whatnot. We'll get into some of these questions concerning chemical evolution and whatnot. But asking the question, can a tornado roll through a junkyard and put together and build a plane? It's random. You need the time to do it. Now, that's actually very quick with a tornado, but it's a zero probability that a tornado is going to roll through a junkyard and build a plane. Zero probability if you take ink and throw it on paper that it becomes a book. There has to be design. There has to be creative intelligence behind it. There has to be an outside source that puts the information there to make it become what it is. That's all we're saying in this. When we look at the fossil record, when we look at DNA, when we look at biological systems, when we look at living systems, what do we see? And the further along we go, and I'm convinced of this now, folks, in time, it's pointing to the fingerprint of God. It's pointing to that creator. A lot of scientists are now scratching their head. A lot of scientists are now stepping back and saying, you know what? I need to think this one through maybe differently than I did even 20 years ago, because what I see in the cell, because of the dynamics and the intricacy and the complexity, and I'm seeing that someone did this, something did this, something created this, something made this happen. So again, that's what we're looking at here. You see the design. The question is going to be who designed it. I made a comment, I think, several weeks ago, reading Richard Dawkins, one of the foremost atheist anti-creationists that there is out there. He basically said, yes, there is design, and we see the design in nature, and we see the design in the cell, and we see the design in molecules, and we see all of this design around us, but it's just an illusion. Now think about that for a minute, folks. It's just an illusion. Francis Crick, tied into the founding and the discovery of DNA, didn't want to admit that there was a God, but he did go as far to say, and you can look this up, he did go as far to say, maybe Dawkins said the same thing when he did, I think, an interview with, it was on Expelled, maybe with John Lennox, I don't remember, one of his interviews or debates. Pretty much said to say it could have been, that the seeding of life came to this earth from, other living beings and other planets or other, or whatever it may be. Now, you just jumped out of the pan into the fire with this because you're still doing what? Now, you won't say there's a God, but you might say there's an alien that came to earth, on purpose or accidentally and seeded the earth with humanity and with life form and whatever. You see where we're going with this? You see where faith is involved? When you get to origins, when you take all of this and boil it back down to the very beginning, to the origins of life, and boil it all the way back down, you still have to come to the place of where did all this structure and design and where did all this fascination that we see in creation, where did it come from? How did we get it? Why is it here?
And evolution teaches that there's no purpose, that there's no plan, there's no goal, there's no direction, there's only chemical properties. I think I gave the illustration where you know, we're like a can of Coke. We just have properties that are within a can of Coke, and it just fizzes and buzzes and does its thing, and you shake it up and it explodes, and that's what we came from and how we got here and what took place, and given enough time and given enough chance, it can take place and does take place. Well, we're going to look at that later on. The question is this: with life and design on a molecular level, looking at how did it get there, what were the processes that got it there, what is the probability of it getting there? It's going to take a whole lot of time, a whole lot of chance. Been a lot of people, folks, way smarter than me that have done the mathematical equations on some of this stuff, and the probability is pretty much zero. It's like throwing a 13 on a dice. Getting the life and the design and the living system just on a molecular level, it's like you taking that die and you throwing it and you keep rolling and you keep expecting a 13. Are you going to get a 13? You're not going to get a 13. Probability zero. So the question has to be, where did that life and design and ability for life and design come from? Is it just an illusion? Or is that just a belief that we have that it's an illusion? Or is it just an assumption that we use to say it's just an illusion? So this is pretty critical. Now let's go to the next slide here. I don't even know what I got here. Let's look here. Okay, where do we come from in our relative to DNA? I pointed out a few minutes ago, I think, that DNA is language, DNA is information, DNA is fascinating. Man, if I were younger, I may have gotten into this field and whatnot. And again, with Christians, non-Christians, believers, non-believers, some on the fence, not on the fence, those that are biologists and scientists and whatnot. And there's a lot of scientists that are believers. They believe in religion and believe in God and whatnot. Again, they're interpreting the data as they see it differently relating to an evidence of creation or a creator. There's one thing that they do know, is that there's volumes of information in DNA and in the cell and on the molecular level. So if that's the case, is it divine delusion? If that's the case, can we say, well, let me give you an example. This is how far it can be seen and taken and whatnot. Creativity and imagination will lead people to say things such as this. One particular famous atheist said that creation happened because of gravity. Now think logically about that. He says we're here because through the processes and ultimately because of gravity, which he thinks that possibly could have been used in the impetus, the force that's there to cause origins and life to begin ultimately. Think logically about that if it's gravity. And I'm going to do a pregnant pause here for a second. Think about it. Where did the gravity come from? Do you see? Amber, you hear my throat? Yeah, I'm cracking a little bit. Do me a favor, can you grab me those notes off the printer right there? My daughter's helping me out this evening. Thank you, Amber. That was Stephen Hawking that said that gravity could have been the impetus for origins and for life. Lawrence Krauss says, I think I mentioned a few weeks ago, that nothing is something. They do know that everything began from nothing, but he says nothing is something. And he's redefining nothing. Dawkins said maybe aliens put us here. Let me ask, and part of the problem, I'm convinced, part of the problem is the fact that a God places demands on us.
We'll get more into this when we look at morality. One of the big things I think that holds people up. Now, I trained with Frank Turek and been involved with his ministry for a number of different times. And Frank travels all over the United States, the world, and talks, does talks like these in colleges and universities and whatnot. And you'll hear him say, and he does say, that one of the biggest things that pops up when he brings up this issue in universities and colleges, it's always sex. It's always the element of sex. If you study evolution, the name T.H. Huxley is going to come up. If you study evolution, you're going to see the, I think it was a nephew of T.H. Huxley, the other Huxley. Anyway, there are two Huxleys. The younger Huxley said, we don't want there to be a God. Okay, I'm paraphrasing now. Because if there is a God, then that's going to put a kibosh on what we want to do. Drugs, sex, rock and roll. That's pretty much, that was his comment on this. And Frank Turek has driven the nail home on this and talking in universities and colleges and whatnot. And he's saying that that's the same answer he's getting. If there were a God, and everything we're saying about the Bible, and we're going to get into that later on in our study, and everything we're revealing concerning the miraculous nature of God and the fingerprint of God, and showing more evidence for there to be a God, reasonable evidence for there to be a God. If all of that's true, would you become a Christian if you find Christianity is true? Would you be a Christian? And he said many of them say no. Why? Why not? Because I don't like the fences that are put up around me relating to my morality, what I want to do, what I want to be, how I want to live, way I want to exist. I want to be my own God, if you please, and you want to say it that way. And I'm convinced, what I was getting to, I'm convinced with a lot of these guys, they'll go as far to say maybe we were seeded here by aliens from other planets. Yes. You say God? No. Well, wait a minute. You just said an alien could have came, and seeded life here on the earth. Yeah. But what the God in Scriptures really, and what we see in Scripture, in the beginning God, and what we see in Scripture concerning creation, what we see in Scripture concerning evidences of what we should find in the fossil record, all of these things, and no. Whoa, wait a minute. Do we see where we're going with this? The reasonableness of asking some of these questions. So anyway, I think what we'll do is we'll probably go ahead and wrap it up, because I'd actually forgot about this list, and I want to read some of this, and we'll actually pick up next week and spend a little more time next Sunday dealing with DNA and some of the specifics related to DNA. And but I want to take just a few minutes and read to you concerning some of these individuals here who are not atheists and what they say about it. Okay, they're scientists. Okay, they are scientists, and you'll find list of scientists. By the way, there's an association out there now of scientists that are creationists. And a lot of people think, when you become a Christian, you have to check your brains at the door. So when you walk in, just open your head up, give us your brain. I'm talking about in the church. You go in the church, give us your brain. When you come back out, we'll give your brain back to you. It doesn't work that way, and it's never worked that way. It's funny and it is funny to say it that way, but it's not true. We always say keep an open mind about Christianity, or keep an open mind about evolution, or keep an open mind. The problem is on both sides, left or right, you weigh the balances. The problem is finding that middle ground, because sometimes we'll open our minds so much that our brains do fall out. So we have to be very, very careful on how we
how we go with the evidence and take it and follow where it leads, and then, lay the cards on the table and ask ourselves, what does this mean? What does it point to? What does it show? What does it look like? And there's a lot of Christian scientists that are out there, and they're brilliant men. Most of the forefathers of the scientific field were men of faith, and we know that from history. We know that from what they've said themselves. They may not have always believed, evangelical Christianity or believe Christianity like we know, but they've believed in intelligence, believed in a creator, believed in, something other than time and chance and happenstance. So I want to read to you what some of these, as we come to a close, what some of these men have said. Professor Christian Affinson, Nobel Prize for Chemistry, Biochemistry of RNA, Johns Hopkins University. Now, I'm quoting him now, okay? I think that only an idiot can be an atheist. I'm just a messenger, okay? I wouldn't say, he's being tongue-in-cheek, I think. We must admit that there exists an incomprehensible power of force with limitless foresight and knowledge that started the whole universe going in the first place. So he's saying from science, what I see is this. There's a beginning, we had a beginner. And it wasn't accident. Professor Werner Archer, Nobel Prize for Physiology and Medicine, restriction of enzymes, molecular genetics from the University of Basel. I do not think our civilization has succeeded in discovering and explaining all the principles acting in the universe. I include the concept of God among these principles. I am happy to accept the concept without trying to define it precisely. I know that the concept of God helped me to master my many questions in life. It guides me in critical situations, and I see it confirmed in many deep insights into the beauty and the functioning of the living world. You have a scientist that's basically saying, when I see science, I see the fingerprint of God. Now, let me stop right there and make a comment. A lot of people say, well, I can't believe in a God, and I don't want to believe in a God, and God messes with my life or lifestyle and whatnot. But the big thing is, I just don't want to believe in God, or I can't believe in God because I don't see him, I can't touch him, I can't taste him, I can't feel him, I can't, none of that. So since that's the case, and I go with the scientific method, I only know what science tells me. Well, let me ask you a question. Do you believe in gravity? We just mentioned gravity a few minutes ago. Gravity could have been, according to Stephen Hawking, at some point, the impetus for creation. Do you believe in gravity? Most of us would say what? Yeah, I believe in gravity. The big question is, do you know what gravity is? What's the answer? Let's be honest. We know what the answer is. Well, when you throw something up and it pulls it back down, or it keeps it, melded into the ground, and it creates fall and whatnot. And that's not what I'm asking. The question is, what is gravity? We know what gravity does. We don't know what it is. Do you see where I'm going with this? Can you see gravity? We see the effects of gravity. Can we taste gravity? Can we taste gravity? No. See where I'm going with this? So don't write someone off because they say, hey, look, I believe in God. And since I believe in God, whom I can't see, touch, taste and whatnot, I can feel his effects in my life. I see his effects in my life. I experience God's effects in my life. And because I believe in that, don't write me off. Well, I'm not going to write the scientist off that says, hey, I believe in gravity. I don't know what it is, but I can see what it does. Is that logical? Does it make a little bit of sense, maybe? Hopefully. Hope so. I would think so. To some degree, anyway. What's energy? Energy doesn't, we know what energy does. We don't know what it is. I mean, we the same thing, in science, we know the forces of energy. But again, lay those two together, gravity and energy. It's the same concept. you don't write someone off. We know it's there. We know, well, is it possible if we looked hard enough and we really, I can see the handiwork and declare the glory of God because I can see what he does, what he is. Okay? All right, let me get back to this. I don't know why I went down that rabbit hole, but I did. Professor D.H.R. Barton, Nobel Prize for Chemistry, Conformational Analysis in Organic Chemistry, Texas A&M University, says this: God is truth, and he put a period there. By the way, here we go. Want another rabbit hole just real quick? We'll get more into this next week. DNA, when starting out with your DNA, when you began, when you were conceived, you started about the size of a period that's on this paper, okay? It has 6 feet or a little over 6 feet of coiled DNA in it, which relates all of the traits and functions and characteristics, and we'll get more into that. It's just fascinating. Every time I see a period on a paper, I think of that. He says, God is truth, period. There is no incompatibility between science and religion, and I don't believe so either, and I've said that for years. I don't believe that you need to fight about these things. We need to research them out, look at them, look at the evidences, and interpret them, but I think the scale leans toward intelligence on the other side. He says both are seeking the same thing, truth. So he says God is truth, but we're all seeking truth, and even in science we're looking for truth. Professor Ulrich Becker, High Energy Particle Physics, MIT. How can I exist without a creator? I'm not aware of any answer that's ever been given. Professor Stephen Bernasek, Solid State Chemistry, Princeton University. I believe in the existence of God. His existence is apparent to me in everything around me, especially in my work as a scientist. On the other hand, I cannot prove the existence of God the way that I might prove or disprove a scientific hypothesis. Energy, gravity, we talked about that. You can see, you can do in a test tube, you can watch the movement of these things, but yeah, the proving of God, you can't do it in a lab. Dr. Francis Collins, I think we've mentioned him thus far. Francis Collins, by the way, is the former director of the Human Genome Project. Director, National Institute of Health, author of the book, The Language of God. Freeing God from the burden of special acts of creation does not remove him as the source of things that make humanity special and of the universe. It merely shows us something of how he operates. He's saying, I see the hand of God. Professor Freeman Dyson, Theoretical Physics, Princeton Institute for Advanced Study. I do not make any clear distinction between mind and God. God is what mind becomes when it's been passed beyond the scale of our comprehension. God may be either a world soul or a collection of world souls. So I'm thinking that atoms and humans and God may have minds that differ in degree, but not in kind. Sir John Eccles, Nobel Prize, Neurochemistry. If I consider reality as I experience it, the primary experience I have is of my own existence as a self-conscious being, which I believe is God created. Professor Manfred Eigen, Nobel Prize Chemistry, Fast Reaction Kinetics, Director, Max Planck Institute for Biophysical Chemistry in Göttingen. Religion and science neither exclude nor prove one another. Again, you can meld and weld the two together. Professor John Furnaces, Mathematics, Princeton University. I believe that there is a God and that God brings structure to the universe at all levels, from elementary particles to human being to superclusters of galaxies. Professor P.C.C. Garnham, Medical Protozoology, University of London. God originated the universe or universes. At some point in evolution, when proto-humans were sufficiently advanced, God created the human soul by faith and by appreciation of scientific necessity. God must exist. Now, what we see out of this, he believes in theistic evolution. Whole nother ball game. Not going to go there tonight. Professor Conyers Herring, Solid State Physics, Princeton University. We live in a hard, real universe to which we have to adapt. God is a characteristic of that universe, indeed a miraculous characteristic. That is a word that you'll find that's not so much used in science as miraculous. That makes that adaptation possible. Things such as truth, goodness, happiness are achievable by virtue of a force that is always present in the here, the now, and available to me personally. Professor Vera Kitowski, Experimental Nuclear Physics, MIT, Mount Holyoke College. I am satisfied with the existence of an unknowable source of divine order and purpose, and I do not find this in conflict with being a practicing Christian. Got a few more here. Professor Sir Neville Mott, Nobel Prize for Physics, Solid State Physics, Cambridge University. We can and must ask God which way we ought to go, what we ought to do, and how we ought to behave. Professor Robert Newman, Nuclear Isotope Chemistry Physics, Princeton University. The existence of the universe requires me to conclude that God exists. Professor Edward Nelson, Mathematics, Princeton University. I believe in, pray to, and worship God. Dr. Arno Penzias, Nobel Prize for Physics for first observation, Vice President of Research, AT&T, Bell Laboratories. Remember, we brought him up when they found the red shift. Okay. By looking at the order in the world, we can infer purpose and from purpose, we begin to get some knowledge of the creator, the planner of all this. This is then how I look at God. I look at God through the works of God's hands, and from those works imply intention. From these intentions, I receive an impression of the Almighty. Reverend Professor John Polkinghorne, Theoretical Elementary Particle Physics, President's Queen's College, Cambridge University. I take God very seriously indeed. I am a Christian believer, indeed an ordained Anglican priest, and I believe that God exists and has made himself known in Jesus Christ. Professor Abdus Salam, Nobel Prize for Physics, Elementary Particle Theory, Director, International Center for Theoretical Physics in Treatise. Now, this sense of wonder leads most scientists to superior being. The old one, as Einstein affectionately called the deity, a superior intelligence, the Lord of all creation and natural law. Professor Arthur Schauer, got a few more here. Nobel Prize for Physics, Laser Physics, Stanford University. Seems to me that when confronted with the marvels of life, one must ask why and not just how. The only possible answers are religious. I find a need for God in the universe and in my own life. Professor Wolfgang Smith, Philosophy, Mathematics, and Physics, Oregon State University. His theoretical work provided the key for solving the re-entry problem in spaceflight. If the physics of the last century prompted atheism, the physics of today is inciting at least the most thoughtful of its votaries to re-examine the question of God. Professor Charles Towns, Nobel Prize for Physics, Development of Maser Laser, University of California, Berkeley. I believe in the concept of God and in his existence. And then lastly, Eugene Wigner, Nobel Prize for Physics, Applications of Symmetry Principles, Group Theory to Quantum Mechanics, Princeton University. The concept of God is a wonderful one. It also helps us make decisions in the right direction. We would be very different, I fear, if we did not have that concept. And that was the last one. I put that one last, or wanted to read that one last in the order here. Because I think what we see here, if we did not have that concept, every one of us have built inside of us a desire. I believe, this is my personal opinion now, this is my opinion, that we all have a desire. We have personal desire to know something higher, to worship, to go more than what we are. We see that in human history. We see that evidenced in human history. Man has always worshiped something, a frog, a tree, the sun, stars, moon. May have gotten it wrong in many cases, but why is it there? Why is there this innate? Did evolution create that? Did evolution, in the past create this internal, this internal ticking clock that says, now's the time, find God? Where'd it come from? I believe it again goes back to the innate desire that we have, as well as the design that we have physically and in functionality and in structure and whatnot. Same thing is true spiritually, that God has created as in his image, and relative to our spirit, created in us a desire to know him. And I think looking at nature, looking at creation helps us to do that. All right, folks, we'll pick up next week back on these sessions, but we are also going to be and will be Tuesday night, 7 o'clock, looking at some questions and answers that we've received in the session so far, and we'll dig down into some of that if you want to join us. 7 o'clock this coming Tuesday. God bless you and wonderful evening.